Good morning, Ugly Mug marketing friends and followers. Welcome to another edition of Ugly Mug Marketing Coffee Chats, the live show where we drink coffee and chat about marketing, business, leadership, and everything in between. My name is Hannah Balliet, and I'm the Director of Communications and Teaching here at Ugly Mug. And I'm your host for today's show. And today I'm really honored to have our operations manager, Maura Saldana, here today to chat with us about feedback, which is something that we all receive in our day-to-day lives, whether it's personally or professionally. Maura has been on our team for nearly 7 years now, which is crazy to think. She'll be celebrating 7 years here, I think in November-ish timeframe. And she began her journey here as a project coordinator and has worked her way to becoming our operations manager, a role that had nearly never existed in the history of Ugly Mug. And in this role, she receives quite a bit of feedback, and she also requests and gives feedback. And I'm always impressed with how Maura carries herself in her role in general, but especially in the midst of receiving and giving feedback. And I'm really excited for her to shed light on feedback, the book that we recently read as a team called Thanks for the Feedback. Welcome to the show today, Maura.
Thank you.
Now, Maura and I are both battling a little bit of a cold, so
Yes.
hence our voices. So sorry if we sound like we're straining or if we have to mute to quick give a little cough, but we still really wanted to have the conversation here today. So hang in there with us. Again, thanks for being on the show, Maura.
Thank you. Yes, this is very important, so we didn't want to miss it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just dive right on into all things feedback related. One of the topics that we've consistently been talking about as we've been reading the book, Thanks for the Feedback, and as you were preparing your email and preparing for this conversation, we really wanted to dive into first the three types of feedback. So, talk to us more about these three types of feedback, the different categories, and how we can easily identify what is falling into each of these pieces of feedback as we're giving and receiving.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so the three main types of feedback, we're going to start off with the fun one. That's appreciation. So that's when
Yeah.
someone is telling you thank you or you did an amazing job on this. I appreciate you. That's the first one. The second one is coaching. That's more along the lines of, well, here's a better way you could do it, or have you tried this yet? And then there's evaluation. And most of the time, this is the one that people don't like because
Yeah.
evaluation is often seen as a negative. But essentially, evaluation is here's where you stand. So it could be here's where you stand and it's an amazing job that you're doing, or here's where you stand and you need improvement. So there's two different aspects of evaluation, but those are the top three: appreciation, coaching, and evaluation.
Okay. And I feel like you mentioned, there's like pros and cons in each of those different categories, right? Like appreciation, of course, we're going to be feeling the love, hopefully, from our colleague or from our spouse or whoever we may be getting feedback from. Um, but then in that last category of evaluation, there's certainly room for, hey, here's some areas that you might need to improve on. And I think, especially in that category, we might feel a little triggered by
Mhm.
the feedback that we're receiving, especially if it's areas, like I said, that we need improvement on. And so let's chat a little bit more about triggers because those go hand in hand, especially in that area. What are some common triggers that are identified in the book, or maybe that you personally have noticed as you're receiving and giving feedback? Let's talk about triggers because I feel like that's such a term that's popular right now in pop culture is triggers, and especially across things of mental health too. And so I think it's like really relevant given what you just mentioned, but just in pop culture in general.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's just back it up to how we identify those triggers. So most of the time, we're not going to notice something unless we're told to notice it or we're shed light
Yeah.
on how to notice it. So how do you notice that you're triggered by something?
Yeah.
And how you notice that is noticing what your body does. So your body's going to react to these triggers, whether it's an internal person talking to you, your internal thoughts saying, oh no, that's completely wrong, or how dare they say that about me? That's
Yeah,
reacting to a
like that
trigger.
defensiveness. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's one way you can tell that you were triggered by something, is through that reaction. Another way is just physically. Your heart rate is going to increase. That means you're going to feel your heart pounding. You might clench your fists. There's all these types of physical reactions to our body's response to triggers.
Yeah, and I think as someone who regularly goes to therapy, and I talk with my therapist a lot about triggers, and I feel like the physical reactions that we might have are oftentimes the ones that I personally, or oftentimes that we don't notice. Like, I notice when I'm being defensive more so than this is making my heart race, or I'm feeling like my hands are getting clammy, or I am just clenching my body overall, or
Yeah.
like all of a sudden my shoulders are like creeping up like this, right? Instead of like being in a more relaxed state. I feel like I notice that, like, okay, I probably am being a little defensive, or things are kind of escalating or coming to a head in the conversation more so than those like physical things. Or it might be a situation too where you're getting feedback and you are having that physical reaction, but maybe you aren't having the like defensive, like emotional response to the feedback too. So I love the dynamic of thinking of both of those, like that very like obvious reaction, very verbal or nonverbal reaction versus just the physical that maybe you are only noticing in the midst of that conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And there's two, well, there's probably way more, but two very different types of people. One, you can see reactions, and the other, you cannot. And I'm most of the time, not all the time for sure, but most of the time, I'm the one where you cannot see reactions.
Mm,
Internal reactions are big for me. So I'm going to have to notice my heart beating, like I can hear my heart beating, or my thoughts inside my mind are telling me things. I have to notice those a whole lot more than I have to notice, okay, like this, or clenched
yeah.
fist, or stuff like that. Um, so that's why that sticks out to me a whole lot more, is because I have to notice that about myself.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I am so facial. Like, I really try to be good in professional settings. And that's why I think I love this topic too, because this is also relevant personally and professionally. But I know about myself. I'm very self aware of the fact that my facial expressions, like, if somebody is saying something that I don't like, you might notice that I don't like it
Yeah.
just based on my body language or my facial expression, and so especially in professional settings, it's been really helpful for me to A, have that awareness about myself, um, but B, like, understand more about, like, how that can impact how I'm receiving the feedback, or, even our facial expressions and body language when we're delivering feedback too. So all very, very relevant, um, on both sides of personal and professional, but on both sides of giving and receiving feedback as well. Now, we've talked a little bit about managing our reactions, which can sometimes be facial, right? Or sometimes we can have this like um, physical kind of overtaking of clenching or getting tense, or we might also kind of like have this initial response of like wanting to lash out. How do we manage these reactions? How did it come about in the book? I of course read the book, but I really want to hear some of your key takeaways of how do we manage our reactions in personal and in professional, I guess, in personal and professional conversations where feedback is being exchanged.
Yeah, for sure. Now, first off, I do have to say, just in case my husband is watching this, on a personal level, I am very facial, but
Yeah.
I am way more tuned into that on a professional level. So I guess I just relax when I'm not at work. um,
Yeah.
okay. So how do we manage those reactions? First off, like we said, you have to be able to notice them. So you have to know what your body is doing or has done in the past so you can be aware of it as soon as it happens. But then you have to actually separate the type of feedback that you're receiving. So you
Mm-hmm.
have to know in your mind, okay, is this person giving me that coaching feedback, evaluation feedback? What type of feedback are they giving me? Because that's going to
Yeah.
help determine what you do with the rest of your reaction. So notice what you do first and then figure out what type of coaching or evaluation your feedback giver is giving you. And if you don't know
Yeah.
or you can't tell, ask them, because that's important to be able to fully understand the feedback, but also to make sure everyone's reactions and emotions are on the right page.
And that's what I was gonna just ask you actually is it appropriate to ask someone maybe even in the midst of the feedback or after the feedback has been provided, like, what category are you feeling like this falls into? Or is it appropriate for us as the person who's delivering the feedback to say, this is this type of feedback? What is your take on that?
Yeah, I would say 100%. If you're unsure, it's not going to benefit either you or the feedback giver if it's not clear. So
Yeah.
if you don't know and you are actually trying to listen and understand their feedback and you're trying to improve and get better, then you need to know what type of feedback they're giving you. And so
Yeah.
as a giver, acknowledging that in the front is going to be beneficial for the whole conversation to make sure everyone's on the same track. And the feedback actually is beneficial and there can be some sort of action from that feedback. Because if not,
Yeah.
then you're just talking.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I think it's important just for all of us across the board, especially in professional settings, having clearly identified what the different types of feedback are as a team so that when you enter into the conversation too, you have that mutual understanding of, hey, I can tell you I'm providing this type of feedback. And you already, the person who's receiving it already knows what that means. So
Mhm.
that can just be a really helpful, like, tool for you as a person who's in leadership or working cross functionally with maybe these aren't people that necessarily you're leading, but that you're just working alongside of in general, right? Like, we want to make sure that we have those clear communication channels and that people understand the type of feedback that you're about to provide and receive so that they can then understand how to kind of manage their reaction. And honestly, so that you too, as a deliverer of the feedback, know how to manage your reaction to how they might be reacting, right? So that we can have a conversation that's actually productive and that you aren't just reacting to their however they might be reacting, right? Like, there's a little bit of that taking place too. It's not just like, hey, I'm delivering this feedback and they're going to receive it well. There might be dialogue that happens in the midst of that feedback. And so we want to make sure that we are prepared and understand going into the conversation as well. So that identifying piece of, hey, I'm providing this feedback to somebody and it falls into the midst of, a category of I'm providing, what were we talking about? A review of some
Yeah.
sort. What?
Yeah.
Yeah, like it falls into that category. So, what are this person? I'm going to be offering ways for this person to improve. I need to be prepared for how they might react to receiving
Yeah.
that type of feedback too. So, yeah, I think that's super important thing just to know and really helpful as we're preparing to be on either side of the conversation as well. Real quick,
100%.
I saw Ariel said, will a recording be available for us to review? Absolutely. You can always come back to, in this instance, our Facebook and our YouTube pages and catch the replay of our conversation. So feel free to come back and jump in and tune in there. And Angela said, I'm coming back. Good stuff. Awesome, Angela. Excited you're tuning in. And if you kind of got to hop in and out, hopefully you can go back and catch the whole episode here today. So, Maura, as we've been talking about, we might react differently personally or professionally, given different dynamics of relationships, a spouse versus, our coworker or our boss, whatever it may be. I was wondering if you could share a personal story. It can be something in a professional or personal setting, where you could kind of walk us through identifying the type of feedback, maybe a trigger that occurred in the midst of that feedback, whether it was for yourself as the receiver, or maybe someone else, you were the deliverer and someone else was receiving the feedback, and kind of how you were able to manage your reaction, or you noticed the other person on the receiving end managing their reaction.
Yeah. So I didn't want to give too many juicy stories. So I'm bringing this all the way back to college.
Love it.
um, the first thing that came to my mind when I was thinking through, okay, what kind of triggers have I noticed? How did I react? And what was the feedback type related to that? Took me right back to art school. I have a vivid picture in my mind. It's a long hallway. We had our art on one side of the hallway. We were all lined up on the other side, and our professor was looking at our artwork. He went down the line of the artwork. Each individual one, he would offer feedback.
Okay.
From him, it was coaching feedback. During the first assessment, I did not take it as coaching feedback. I took it
Okay.
as identity. Like he was talking about me personally. It was an identity trigger. It wasn't like a truth or relationship trigger. It was directly related to me as a person, not my
Yeah.
artwork, me. So as he was going through, did I hear what he was saying about my project? Maybe. I don't remember that. The only thing I remember is how it made me feel. So that
Yeah.
right there is one way. If you're not sure, was this a trigger? Yeah. If you don't remember anything else besides how it made you feel, that's one way to see it. So I was upset, not visibly, like I mentioned before. It was all internally. So in my mind, I was like, how could he talk about my artwork that much? Does he know how much time I spent on this? I did
Yeah.
exactly everything that he asked for in this design, but yet it's not good enough. So this
Mm.
isn't my fault. This is his fault. He didn't explain something clear enough. Those are all the thoughts that are going through my mind as
Yeah.
he's telling me or coaching me on what could have been done better. So the reaction I had to that was based on my limiting knowledge of the different types of feedback and how you can
Yeah.
have coaching feedback that does not attack you as a person.
Yeah.
So that's the very first thing that came to my mind is my misidentification of the type of feedback I was received or given, and how I took that personally, where it should have been a coaching time.
Yeah. I love that example because I think that is so applicable in the workplace too. Like, how often have we submitted something to our supervisor for review, or for approval, maybe? And in the midst of you just wanting to get a yay or nay, like, is this good? Can I publish this? Or can we run forward with this plan? They're taking the red pen to it, right?
Yeah.
And we can take that so personally. I remember in my first job out of college, I had that same identity moment of I would send my boss something and they would review it and they would take the red pen to it, or they would go in editing mode in the Google Doc or in Word or whatever it was. And I felt like they were like rewriting all of my work,
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
saying that I had to change this, every
Mhm.
single little detail. And I felt it it felt so maddening. It felt so
Yeah.
frustrating. I felt like, what is the point or the purpose of me even writing this or doing this work
Mhm.
or trying to implement this if you're just going to change it every single time? But
Right.
what we were both failing to see was that really she was trying to coach me. Like she was trying to challenge me to be a better writer or to see moments where I could have used a different word or I could have shortened things or I could have, but we never had dialogue over it either. That was one key component. It was just she would change things or she would send over the feedback. I would consume it, and there was no conversation that was taking place around it. And that was such a missed opportunity. And
100%.
we've talked about this. Even I know we've talked about this with Gavin, who is an author and has written books on leadership, but also has been a coach for us internally at Ugly Mug Marketing. One of the things that Gavin was talking about is that is the type of feedback that happens so often in the workplace. It's a document, it's an email, it's a blog post, it's approval on a Facebook post. It's, those are the kinds of ways that we're sharing information digitally. We're not talking face to face with our colleagues or with our superior or with our subordinates. And so how the feedback takes place is so important to how it's being received too.
Yeah.
And I think the book touches maybe a little bit on that. I feel like it focuses more so on the buckets and the triggers and things like that. But I think another thing that is important is context of the conversation too, or of the feedback that's taking place, because it is really, really easy in those instances to take that so personally and as an identity, it becomes an identity trigger. When in reality, that person, we don't know their tone. We don't know the category of feedback that it was supposed to be coaching, like you mentioned earlier. And that would likely very much change the way that I was receiving that had I known, in my instance, very similar to yours, that was intended to be coaching feedback.
Right.
I just noticed that Lisa said 3 different types of feedback. Never thought of it that way. Yeah, like I love that. Look, Maura, for those who maybe just be tuning in, tell us what those 3 categories are again.
Okay, so number 1, appreciation, the best kind. Everybody loves it. Number 2, coaching. And that basically is here's how you can do it differently, or have you thought about doing it this way? And then evaluation is the one that most people don't like. That's the one that's saying, here's where you stand. Could be positive. You stand in a great spot. You're doing an amazing job. And it could be negative. Well, you need to work on some things before you can increase that. So those are the 3 types: appreciation, coaching, and evaluation.
Yeah. And I'd imagine with coaching and evaluation too, especially when we're talking about here's where you stand and here's where you need to be, that can oftentimes feel a little bit like the coaching side of things. But then I'd also imagine that on the side of here's where you stand, you're doing a phenomenal job, that can also feel like a little bit of overlap with the appreciation side of things too. So there's definitely a little bit of room. I'm almost viewing like a Venn diagram of like both types,
There's the overlap.
like the 2, and then that middle one's kind of like a little bit of overlap. And can fall into both of those categories. But yeah, I really just love those categories and the idea of just like being able to come to somebody and say, hey, this is the type of feedback I'm about to provide. Like, I want you to understand that that's important because, I want you to improve, or I want you to know where you stand, or I want you to know how much I appreciate you. That type of language is what we can easily use at the beginning and opening of these conversations, with our peers, subordinates, higher ups, whatever it may be, so that we can navigate these conversations better and maybe not have such a physical, I'm going to say out of body experience of like, oh my gosh, I'm sweating and my, I'm like clenching and I'm making a fist and I'm lashing out, I'm angry. Like, I just feel like so many instances in my life, personally, professionally, like those reactions could have been alleviated by someone just identifying that and like leading the conversation with that,
And this honestly, this talk today ties directly into the one we had last time about crucial conversations, because crucial conversations, the whole point of that is to share ahead of time, to make sure both parties or all parties involved have some sort of insight and knowledge ahead of time, to help alleviate some of those reactions or to make sure those reactions are headed in the right direction.
Yeah, for sure. There's nothing worse than like feeling like you're being ambushed and then being
Yes.
triggered in the
Yep.
midst of the feedback, you know? So yeah, kind of like leading into things. Hey, we're going to have some time for review, or hey, I want to kind of coach you up on this. Like letting people know what it is you want to talk about immediately helps with some of the physical reaction. I think,
Mhm.
for me, I think when someone emails me and is like, hey, can we have a meeting? I'm like, immediately I'm like, what did I do wrong? Like, like if my husband's like, hey, I really want to talk to you about something tonight, I'm like, about what? Like what
Let's
happened?
talk
What did I
now.
do wrong? Is something happening? Like, are you mad at me? Or, like immediately jumping into that like heightened state of like
Mhm.
anxiety or like
Yeah.
clenching or like being tense all day. And it just like impacts your whole day to day rather than like, hey, I want to talk to you about this later and I want to have this kind of
Yeah.
conversation. Like
Yeah.
that can just help the other party prepare too for what's about to take place and can just make it all
Yeah.
the better. So, y'all, that's a whole other topic and a whole other can of worms, crucial conversation. So, if you scroll back on our YouTube channel, Facebook, or LinkedIn, you can go back and you can find Maura and I's conversation all about crucial conversations in the workplace, why those are so important, adding to the shared pool of meaning. It's a really great episode. So, Maura, you're right. These go so hand in hand. So, definitely check that episode out. We are nearing our end of our 30-minute time and coffee chat and sipping on our coffee and water and talking with our raspy voices today as Maura
Right,
and I are both
right.
overcoming colds. But Maura, real quick before we leave, I just wanted to ask you on a personal note, professional note, what is one thing that you are looking forward to this year?
Hmm. If I say anything other than the birth of my son, I think I would be yelled at by all of my coworkers.
Yeah.
So, end of November, I will be having a little boy. Super excited.
Yes. It feels not real to me because I've not seen Mara in person yet. So I'm really looking forward to our next quarterly team meeting where I
Yeah.
can actually see Mara and her little baby bump. And
Mhm.
wow, it's all just going to feel so real. So, any parenting advice, Mara, maybe you don't want it. But in
Well, we'll treat it like
preparation,
any feedback. Y'all can give it to me, and we'll walk
yes.
through whether or not we want to accept it.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So any feedback, any advice, anything on
Mhm.
parenting, if you want to drop that in the comments below. Now we don't want to leave you guys hanging either because in the promotion for this episode and both email and in the ad, we talked about giving away a copy of Thanks for the Feedback. So Mara, how
Yeah.
do you want to go about doing our giveaway? Is it a comment? Is it
Hmm.
a DM? What should
I
we
think
do?
it's a comment. I think
Okay.
you should comment, let us know that you want the book, and then out of those comments, we'll randomly select somebody.
Yes. Like we said, we read this as a team. I think it's so awesome if you are a leader, like not even of a company, but of a department or of a small team, even if it's just you and one other person. I think it would be so amazing for you to read this alongside of someone else so that you guys both have that mutual understanding. So, like Mara said, leave a comment on Facebook, on YouTube, and just let us know, hey, would love a copy of the book and maybe one of your takeaways from our conversation today. Uh, either one's fine, or say both. Hey, I love the conversation today, and I definitely want a copy of the book. Drop that comment down below on Facebook or YouTube. We will choose a winner. Let's say we'll give people through the end of the day tomorrow to leave their
Yeah, that's
comment,
good.
let us know what they thought, and we will select a winner. We will send you a personal message or respond back to your comment to let you know that you are the winner of the copy of the book, and we'll shoot that over to you on Amazon Prime.
Yeah,
So it'll be to you super speedy, maybe even before the end of this week. Uh,
maybe.
Mara, thank you again for tuning in, for sharing all of your wisdom on feedback. I hope that for those of you tuning in, whether you watch live or you're catching the replay, that this was a very interesting conversation, an applicable conversation that you can then go apply to your personal or professional life or both. Because Feedback is all around us. We are constantly receiving feedback. We are constantly being triggered too. And we constantly need to be aware of those triggers and of that feedback and know how we can best manage our reactions to feedback and how we can manage how we react to someone's reaction of giving them feedback too. It's all intertwined. Maura and I also mentioned that other episode on crucial conversations. So make sure you scroll back. I think it was just a few weeks ago, a couple months ago. We talked about crucial conversations. You can find that again on our Facebook or YouTube. And gosh, I think that's all we have for you today. Oh yeah, and your parenting advice. Drop that in the comments too. Yes. Specifically around welcoming in a new baby or baby boys or, how to best navigate that. Would love your thoughts.
Most used items, whatever.
Yes. Most used item or most useless item, in your opinion.
Yes.
So many things on baby registries that they're not totally useless, but they're just like, you don't need that.
Yeah.
And you especially don't need it in like the first 6 months of life. There will be things that you might need like a little later, but I'm just like, especially if you're someone like me who has like a smaller home or like not a lot of storage, like where are we putting the baby jumper? Like we don't have room for that in the first 6 months of life. We can get that later, right? So tell us about those things in the comments too. We would love to hear that for Maura and her husband as they welcome their little bundle of joy, baby boy, coming end of November, early December. Again, thank you all for tuning in today. Thank you again, Maura. We will catch y'all at the next coffee chat. I'm trying to jog my memory right now. If we have one next week, it might be the week after. Yeah, we've got a little bit of time till our next coffee chat. We'll make sure that we keep you updated on that. It's always same time, same place, 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern, right here on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We will catch y'all the next time. See you guys.
See ya.